Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Well, hello, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. My name is Steve Prentice, and this is our first inaugural show, and our sponsor for this episode is Omada, and you'll be hearing more about them later in the show. So it is my pleasure for this new first runoff today to introduce Ross Young. He is our guest, and he is the CISO of Caterpillar Financial. And what we plan to do today is to just talk about the 10 top stories that we have looked at through the week, including Friday morning's sessions coming up, Friday morning's headlines coming up tomorrow, and ask Ross what you think about these things. And we've obviously had a very busy week. It's remarkable, actually, to think about the things that have gone on here this week. So the number one story that I'd like to ask you about here is the Capitol breach. We have seen a shocking amount of weirdness happening with people moving around the Capitol building. But beyond that, what I'd like to ask you about is the cyber security potential here. We saw people moving around, sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk, taking photographs of her screen. The machinery was not turned off. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think, Ross, about what's happened here and what the potential danger is for, well, basically for the entire Capitol Hill and Washington area?
Yeah, this is something that's very alarming. I think any CISO doesn't want to lose physical access to their assets, right? We don't know what emails may have been forwarded during this time to the infiltrators. We don't know what things may have been planted in the network. We don't even know all the people who came into the office, right? Could there have been Russians, Chinese, and other folks within the crowd that had access to those offices? All I know is if I were in that case, assume everything is compromised, rip and replace. There is nothing good that comes from those machines. And you need to understand that after that, you'll definitely want to watch your DLP and anything else that could happen, right?
Yeah, what a terrible thing. I mean, they looked like an interesting group of local people, but there's nothing to say that any of those people could be a plant to go in and try these things out. So, yes, it's a shocking sort of reverberation as to what they'll have to change and exactly that, rip and replace in these early days of the Biden administration. So, moving from that, we're looking also at the fact that over the last few years, Facebook and social media giants like Facebook have taken on an enormously influential role in politics, with the obvious platform being used not only by Mr. Trump, but also by other interested parties on both sides. So we've seen this week three major things developing. One being the banning of Mr. Trump for, I think as of now, an indefinite period of time, and Instagram has followed as well. But the second thing being the banning of political ads in Georgia, and also the removal of hashtags. So what are we looking at in terms of these companies becoming so influential in business and in politics? Should they be regulated more closely?
I do think we're going to see more regulation. In America, we pride ourselves on our free speech and those amendments that come with being the ability to speak. And when that's censored every time somebody says, "Hey, that's not true," or "We're going to pull those things," it gets really hard to want to continue on those platforms. And then people are going to have to go to a different medium to have that, whether it's Signal or something else that really provides a venue for them to provide unchained. I think it's going to be tough to see what happens and how that shakes out for these companies.
Yeah, it certainly seems. I'd be interested to see, who sits on the board of directors of these companies, because there's a vested interest to slant them in one way or the other. And I'm not saying that has happened, but they certainly have taken a huge elephant in the room position beyond just being a social medium. So sticking again with the damage and the bruising of basically the American intelligence and technology community, we're still looking at the SolarWinds hack, and the damage here is escalating to the point now where one of the senators recognized that this isn't just simply a local thing. This has penetrated government agencies, the electrical grid perhaps, and nuclear weapons facilities as well. So my question here is what have you observed in terms of your, I guess, internal communications in terms of where SolarWinds is moving, or any new developments in the last couple of days?
So I think there's a couple things that are really important here. If you were a cyber company, you probably upgraded SolarWinds by now, and you've looked to see do we want this company long term in your organization? And that's really tough for them on a brand uh, piece. The other thing I think is there's a lot of people talking about how do we change the supply chain methodology where we no longer look for just taking everything in, but do we need additional checks and scans and code signing and all the things that may come from a more trusted supply chain approach? So I think that's going to be a little bit different for them and many other commercial companies going forward. And I think the other standout here is FireEye, because at the beginning it was like, how could a security company become breached? And very negative to being, well, if they hadn't come forward, I don't know if anybody else would have really noticed for months going forward. So really good thing to think about.
Do you think also the fact that everyone was drinking from the same well, is there some almost like an antitrust concept here that so many people were relying on the same source of code that we should look into diversifying that somehow?
I don't think that's an option. You take any type of tool, there's always going to be a top two or three vendors in this space because they're good at what they do. And in this example, SolarWinds was the network monitoring tool of choice for so many organizations for well over a decade.
Okay. So looking then at the one of the significant, I guess, locking of horns that happened with the Trump administration in the last year or two with regards to China and to TikTok and the various I guess relationships that Mr. Trump sees with regards to Chinese products. We saw Wall Street announce, I think, on Sunday, their intention to delist a number of Chinese telecom companies, none of which do major business in the U.S., but simply as almost a demonstration of power. And then they walked back on that and said, no, we're not going to do that. And then again today, they walked back on that as well and said, yes, they are indeed going to delist that. So, do you think that? I guess my question to you here is the walking back seem to have referred to some statements made by the Chinese government about how they would, quote, protect their companies, which didn't mean necessarily those three companies, but perhaps other ones that were doing business with the US government and with US enterprise. So where do we stand now in terms of our position here? Is this the right thing to do to try to bully these organizations in this way on Wall Street as opposed to in government?
I think it was a good thing to walk back. And here's the reason why. We did this on a president who's in his last days before he leaves. And we don't know what the executive orders will be from the new president coming in. He may change the relations with China and be very open, and then it doesn't really matter on these things. But when we get into these exchanges back and forth of, hey, we're gonna, hurt Chinese companies, they're going to do the same to American companies, and nobody wins through that additional, hassle, if you will.
Yeah, it seems to be, and again, I mean, all the game will change in a matter of days when the Biden administration takes on their approach to relating to these companies. But it definitely does seem to be a bit of a perhaps showboating on one person's side. But I just thought it was interesting that the walk back and the double walk back seemed to imply that somebody had been spoken to in some way, and this becomes an issue of flux, which is again different to see it on Wall Street as opposed to coming out of Washington. So let's take a pause for a second here and just have a look at our sponsor for today's session, which is coming up right now. Our sponsor for today's show is Omada. Get stakeholders on board early. It sounds simple, but the hard part is making sure that everyone has the right level of information they need at the right time to do their job. So start thinking early about the needs of your CISO and your security staff and auditors and compliance officers and intellectual property controllers. The goal is increased awareness for all, which will reduce the resistance for everyone. So try and find out about what Omada can do for you at omada.net. That's OMADAN.net, N-E-T. Sorry, just fading out the music there in our trial version here. So that is our sponsor for today. And yes, indeed, I got to watch my camera shaking there, so thank you. So going back to our questions now, we've got ourselves a collection of additional things that are going on beyond the local Washington areas. One of which I think is rather interesting is that a judge has denied Julian Assange extradition to the US. So this is something that has been spoken about in terms of almost humanitarian levels, in terms of his supposed mental illness, autism, even perhaps. But my question, I think, for you here is: has the ship sailed on this one? I mean, going back to WikiLeaks now, in a way, it sounds like it's an awfully long time ago, and so much has changed since then. So the extradition has been denied. America wants to have him here for trial, of course. Where do you see this in a historical context?
I think this is really important research as we see more and more of this going forward. The first thing is there's this difference between a reporter and someone who's sworn an oath to protect the nation's secrets. And that individual has to do things because they're legally bound to and they're held trial. The reporter who always has a story on intelligence, they're doing their job to report something, and there's always going to be that focus. And if you anybody who's worked in the intelligence community knows just how much intel is leaked on a daily basis in the news. So I think this is an interesting stance of where we're seeing people go, and hopefully it provides a future groundwork as we see more reporters going forward in the future.
There seemed to be, at the time of WikiLeaks, a joyful, and the same thing with Anonymous as well, a great joy in releasing the information that in the last couple of years has almost been switched around. The playing fast and loose with confidential information is becoming something that is now an issue of politics as well. So it certainly is interesting to see, what his fate may be, as well as the other ones, at Snowden, for example, who's always popping back up as a very influential component of the release of information and the security and what belongs to whom. So indeed, very interesting area. Moving to something more labor related, we've got unionization efforts happening at Google and its parent company Alphabet, in which a small number of the employees of Alphabet have sought to create a union. And the union itself is going to be very small in terms of numbers. It's about 1,000th of the entire population of Alphabet. But they are looking to band together primarily, from what they said, for the reasons of benefits. A lot of people who work for Google and Alphabet are contract workers, and so they are lacking benefits, which I imagine are being much more highly valued in these days when medical care is becoming even more predominant than ever. But there's also a second interesting issue that they want to have a voice with regards to how executives from Google and Alphabet are compensated, or even when they're let go for controversial or harassment issues. And just generally some of the higher level clients that Google and Alphabet may have, especially with regards to munitions in the US military. So unionization in high tech, again, something new, something strange, something that's inevitable. What are your thoughts in there, Ross?
I think this is going to be more inevitable, especially when you think of the Silicon Valley culture. We see a number of reports coming in that it's the bro culture, where it's a bunch of males doing things, and it's very hard if you're a female entering, because who wants to have a venture capital pitch in a hot tub, right? And so those sorts of things don't really work with today's values and inclusion and diversity. So I think we're going to see more of this on the large FANG companies going forward, and hopefully this helps with getting better diversity and inclusion for everyone.
Indeed, it's certainly, again, another interesting thing as these companies mature, going from aggressive startups into something that resembles a sort of a middle age. When you get to Google and Microsoft before it, and Facebook as well, it becomes much more of an organization that needs this kind of adult in the room approach to human resources, as well as the actual innovations and technologies they create. So another component is uh, the fact that the U.S. Army is now looking at bug bounties, a bug bounty program. And I mean, this is not the first one that they have done, but the notion of having a bug bounty program is something that we usually hear about in terms of private sector or just simply regular organizations doing this. So is this, do you think, a new era for the U.S. Army in terms of outsourcing some of their testing to private sector individuals or private organizations? Do you see issues or concerns about that?
I don't see any issues. I think this is a very smart move. You take a look at pen testing and red team. It's some of the most expensive talent you have to hire in a cyber organization, and not only that, it's one of the hardest to retain. It's changing all the time, and if you can do something like using a bug bounty program to crowdsource that and get lots of really qualified talent come in and help the organization, that saves you money. It helps you identify things, and also you can find a lot of great people that may actually enter your organization later on and use it as a hiring pool. So this is a fantastic idea, which is really going to bring more and more benefits to the DoD.
But the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of a red flag there is when you sort of turn out there to the great unknown to bring people in as a security risk. Now, I mean, I understand that the DoD would be very judicious as to who they select and vet, but there definitely seems to be a bit of a weak link there in terms of outsourcing, given the sensitive nature of the Defense Department. So, do you have any worries about going that far afield for bug bounties?
Well, the DoD does a variety of different things. Some things are classified at the highest levels, many other things are very unclassified. And when they can use folks to secure their public facing .mil web pages and use bug bounty programs, there's not a high impact there if things go wrong. So I think that's a good use of resources.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's a great way to look at it, and I certainly agree with that. So, you know what? We're moving along extremely quickly here, and we're coming to the last few minutes of our 20-minute presentation. And the last story that I wanted to share with you, I find rather perplexing, and this is a company, an unnamed company, whose vice president has just been arrested for hacking the PPE supply of healthcare workers. He actually was found to have deleted a number of orders and to falsified the documents with regards to how many had been sent out to a very tangible detriment of healthcare workers across the country. So, I mean, this is a remarkably strange concept. And I guess I'm just delving into the psychology side of your expertise here for a moment as to why would you imagine somebody would want to do something like this, given the urgency of this, the pandemic and the need for PPE across the country?
People make bad decisions, and bad people make bad decisions frequently, right? And sometimes it's greed, it's money oriented, and we need to really just find those things. And the hard thing too with cyber is sometimes it's data, and when you steal digital data, you don't even know it's lost because you still have it in your infrastructure. And that's what makes it very different than all the other types of physical things. So it's great that they found this person. It's sad that this action happened. I only imagine this is actually much more frequent than we believe or know. And hopefully we can keep using good cyber folks to identify these untrusted people who are, stealing from company and people.
I find it remarkable. But that again is the nature, I guess, of cybersecurity. It has a lot of arms and a lot of directions, a lot of people, and a lot of different things going on that we need to keep track of, which is one reason why we do put out our show every day of the week to just let people know what's going on. So, Ross, this has been a very exciting and enjoyable time with you, and your expertise is remarkable, and as we knew it would be. So, this has been a wonderful time. I do want to thank you very much for being with us today. And just wanted to close things off really by saying to everyone out there who is watching and who would like to know more about this to make sure to subscribe to Cybersecurity Headlines. You can go to cisoseries.com to find out all of the information that is going on. And you can sign up also for our various video chats that happen throughout the week. And of course, have a look at Ross's LinkedIn connection. We have him on the information page on our blog, and someone who's definitely is worth making the connection with, and the professional connection for future business as well. So Ross also, I must add, has his own podcast, which is called the CISO Tradecraft Podcast. Is that correct, Ross? It's CISO Tradecast Podcast. So, you can never learn too much about what's going on in this business. And so I'm hoping that this is something that has been of interest to you, and that we can build on this as the weeks go by. It's learning about the concepts that are happening out there in the world, not only in the United States, but around the world as well, in the era of cybersecurity. So this has been Steve Prentice reporting for the CISO
Cybersecurity headlines are
Cybersecurity
available every
Headlines
weekday. Head
podcast.
to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.